The English Channel was a beast. Cold, unforgiving, and perpetually churning. Its grey waters had swallowed the ambitions of more swimmers than had ever conquered its formidable width. For Evangeline Wright, standing on the windswept cliffs of Dover, the Channel was not just a body of water. It was a personal Everest, a challenge that had taken root in her soul years ago and refused to be dislodged. Eva, barely out of her teens but with the sculpted physique of a seasoned athlete, possessed a fierce determination that belied her youthful appearance. She had already attempted the crossing once, a grueling endeavor that had ended in bitter disappointment just a few miles from the French coast. The taste of salt water and defeat still lingered, a constant reminder of her unfinished business. The newspapers back in America had been less than kind. Eva Wright falls short, and Channel claims another victim were headlines she had tried to ignore, but the whispers and pitying glances were harder to escape. Her former coach, a man who had once championed her talent, now spoke of her attempt as reckless youthful folly. Everyone, it seemed, except Eva herself, had given up on her dream. But Eva Wright was not one to be easily deterred. She knew she had the stamina, the lung capacity, the sheer stubborn will required for the crossing. What she lacked, she now realized, was the right guidance, someone who understood not just the mechanics of swimming, but the brutal psychological warfare that the Channel waged on its challengers. This realization had led her to Tommy Ashton. Tommy Ashton was a name whispered with a mixture of respect and pity in the small world of professional swimming. In his youth, he had been a record-breaking long-distance swimmer, a national hero lauded for his grit and endurance. His own attempt at the Channel crossing had been legendary, ending in triumph after a grueling 15 hours in the water. But a tragic boating accident a few years later had claimed the life of his younger sister and left Tommy with a permanent limp and a heart full of bitterness. He had retreated from the public eye, his once bright career extinguished, now spending his days in self-imposed exile in a small, dilapidated cottage on the Kent coast. He was known to be gruff, cynical, and reluctant to take on any coaching work. Finding him had been a task in itself, relying on hushed recommendations and vague directions from old acquaintances. When Eva finally knocked on the weathered door of his cottage, she was met with a man who seemed to have aged far beyond his years. His face was lined, his eyes held a haunted weariness, and his once powerful frame was now stooped with a quiet resignation. He regarded her with open suspicion. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice rough like stones grinding together. Eva, undaunted by his demeanor, stood her ground. "Mr. Ashton," she said, her voice clear and steady against the howling wind coming off the Channel. "My name is Evangeline Wright. I am a swimmer, and I believe you are the only person who can help me cross the English Channel." Tommy Ashton simply stared at her, a flicker of something unreadable in his weary eyes. He had turned his back on the world of swimming, on the memories of his past. He wanted nothing to do with the hopes and dreams of a determined young woman. The Channel, in his mind, was not a challenge to be conquered, but a grave, and he had no desire to stand by and watch another hopeful soul drown in its depths. "Go home, girl," he said, his voice flat, devoid of any warmth. "Find yourself an easier dream, the Channel. It takes more than just wanting it." But Eva Wright was not easily dismissed. She had come too far, carried the weight of her dream for too long. She looked Tommy Ashton directly in the eye, and in her gaze, he saw a reflection of the same stubborn fire that had once burned so brightly within himself. "I know what it takes, Mr. Ashton," she said, her voice unwavering. "I just need someone who knows the way." Eva did not flinch at his dismissal. She had anticipated his resistance, had been warned of his bitter, reclusive nature. She had not traveled all this way to be turned away by a ghost. "You are the only man who has ever beaten the Channel on a neap tide," she said, her voice sharp, cutting through the wind. "You did it in 15 hours and 1 minute, a record that still stands. You did it with a dislocated shoulder for the last 2 miles. You are telling me to find an easier dream, Mr. Ashton. You are the man who proved that the impossible was merely a matter of will." Tommy was taken aback. No one had spoken of his great swim in years. It was a memory he had tried to bury, a ghost of a man he no longer was. This young woman had not just come with a dream. She had come armed with his own history, and she was now using it as a weapon against his despair. He looked at her, at the fierce, intelligent light in her eyes, and a flicker of his old competitive fire stirred within him. He wanted to send her away. He wanted to be left alone with his grief. But her sheer, unshakable belief was a force of nature. "Words are cheap, girl," he rasped, a new, challenging glint in his eye. "The Channel doesn't care about your pretty speeches." He gestured with his chin towards the churning grey sea at the bottom of the cliffs. "You want to prove you have the will? Then prove it. Swim from here to the old pier. It's 2 miles. The water is barely 50 degrees. If you make it, I will consider your foolish request." "If you don't," he said, his voice flat, "you will leave and you will never bother me again." It was a cruel, impossible test designed to break her. The conditions were dangerous, and she was not acclimated. He expected her to refuse, to finally see reason and go home. But Eva's face broke into a small, determined smile. "Thank you, Mr. Ashton," she said simply. Without another word, she turned and made her way down the steep, rocky path to the small, shingled beach below. She disappeared behind a large rock and emerged moments later, wearing her simple, practical wool swimming costume. She did not hesitate. She walked directly into the frigid, churning surf until the water was at her waist. Then she dove forward, her powerful strokes cutting through the waves, her body a small, dark shape against the vast grey sea. Tommy watched from the cliff top, his arms crossed, his face a mask of grim disbelief. He was certain she would last no more than 20 minutes before the cold defeated her, but she did not falter. He watched her technique, the steady, powerful rhythm of her arms, the efficient kick. She was a natural, a machine built for endurance. He found himself, against his will, becoming a coach again. He noted the slight dip in her left shoulder, the way she turned her head a fraction of a second too late to breathe. But most of all, he saw her spirit. He saw her fighting the current, her small body battling the immense, indifferent power of the sea. He saw her refusal to quit. An hour passed. She was now a tiny dot in the distance, halfway to the pier. He could see her strokes slowing, her body clearly aching with the brutal cold. Any sane person would have turned back, but she kept going. He did not know what compelled him to do it, but he found himself walking back to his cottage, his limp more pronounced than usual. He returned with a pair of old binoculars and a thick wool blanket. He stood on the cliff, the binoculars pressed to his eyes, and he watched. He watched as she fought, stroke after agonizing stroke. He watched as she finally, after nearly 2 hours, reached the seaweed-covered pylons of the old pier. He watched as she clung to one for a moment, her body heaving, before she turned and began the impossible journey back. She didn't make it all the way back. She was 100 yards from shore when her body finally gave out. He saw her stop, her form faltering. Without a second thought, the old, forgotten instincts of a rescuer taking over, he scrambled down the cliff path. He waded into the freezing surf, the icy water a shock to his system, and pulled her from the water. She was exhausted, her lips blue, her body trembling uncontrollably, but as he dragged her onto the beach, she was smiling, a triumphant, exhausted grin on her face. He wrapped the thick wool blanket around her, his touch surprisingly gentle. They did not speak. The water had said everything that needed to be said. She had proven her will. He helped her back up the path to his small, warm cottage. He sat her by the fire and made her a cup of hot, sweet tea, his movements efficient and practiced. As she sat there, wrapped in the blanket, the warmth slowly seeping back into her bones, he finally spoke. "Be here tomorrow morning," he said gruffly, his back to her as he stoked the fire. "Dawn. And do not be late. We have a great deal of work to do." The words were the most beautiful sound Eva had ever heard. The training regimen that Tommy Ashton devised was nothing short of brutal. Their days began before dawn with long runs along the windswept cliff tops to build Eva's stamina. This was followed by hours in the frigid, unforgiving waters of the Channel, where Tommy would follow her in a small rowboat, his voice a relentless, barking commentary on her form. "Your left shoulder is dropping, Wright. You're losing power," he would yell over the sound of the waves. "Faster. The tide will turn in an hour. The Channel does not wait for weary swimmers." He was a harsh, demanding, and deeply cynical taskmaster. He seemed to take a perverse pleasure in pushing her to the absolute brink of her physical and mental endurance. He was testing her, constantly, searching for the breaking point he was certain he would find. But Eva never broke. She met his gruff commands with a quiet, unshakable resolve. She swam until her muscles screamed in protest, until her body was numb with cold, until her lungs burned for air. Every day she would stumble from the water, exhausted and shivering, but her eyes would always hold the same steady fire of determination. She would simply nod at his critiques, and the next morning she would be there at dawn, ready to do it all again. Slowly, reluctantly, Tommy's cynicism began to be eroded by a grudging admiration. He had never encountered a swimmer with such a profound capacity for punishment, such a deep well of inner strength. She was, he had to admit to himself, a true champion in the making. Their relationship remained strictly professional, a stark partnership between coach and athlete, but in the quiet hours between training sessions, as they would sit in his small, cluttered cottage, a fragile, unspoken connection began to form. One rainy afternoon, while waiting for the tide to turn, Eva was exploring the single crowded bookshelf in his living room. Tucked behind a row of sailing manuals, she found it, a small, tarnished silver trophy. The inscription read, "All England Long Distance Championship, 1912, Thomas Ashton." Beside it was a small, faded photograph of a young woman with a bright, fearless smile and Tommy's same intelligent eyes. "She was beautiful," Eva said softly, her back to him. Tommy, who had been staring into the fire, stiffened. He did not speak. "Your sister, I presume," Eva continued gently, not turning around, giving him the space to retreat if he wished. "You have the same eyes." For a long moment, the only sound was the crackling of the fire and the drumming of the rain against the window pane. "Her name was Lily," he said finally, his voice a low, rough whisper. "She was a swimmer too. Better than I ever was. Fearless." He fell silent again, the ghosts of the past filling the small room. "The channel. It was her dream first," he said, his voice thick with a pain that was still raw after all these years. "I was training her. The day of the accident, we were out on the boat, practicing in a rough sea. I told her it was too dangerous, but she was so stubborn. A rogue wave. The boat capsized. I tried to reach her, but the current..." He trailed off, his voice choked with a grief so profound it was a physical presence. "It wasn't your fault, Tommy," Eva said softly, finally turning to look at him. "Wasn't it?" he said, a bitter, self-loathing edge to his voice. "I was the champion. I was supposed to protect her. The sea took her from me." In that moment, Eva finally understood. His cynicism, his harshness, his reclusiveness, it was all a shield. He was not a bitter man. He was a heartbroken man, drowning in a sea of guilt. His fear for her was not about her failing. It was about his own. He looked at her and saw the ghost of his sister, another determined young woman with a dangerous dream. She did not offer him empty words of comfort. She simply sat with him in the quiet of his grief, her steady, empathetic presence a silent acknowledgement of his pain. The next day, the dynamic of their training shifted. The harshness in his voice was still there, but now she could hear the undercurrent of fear and concern beneath it. Her own determination was now twofold. She was no longer just swimming for herself, for her own dream. She was now swimming for him too, swimming to prove to him that a dream did not have to end in tragedy, that the water could be a place of triumph, not just a grave. That evening, after the most grueling swim of her life, she stumbled from the water, her body aching. As she reached the beach, she found him waiting. He did not offer a critique of her form. He simply stood there and, without a word, wrapped a thick, warm, dry towel around her trembling shoulders. It was the first truly kind, unsolicited gesture he had ever made. And in that simple, silent act, Eva felt the first true thaw of his frozen heart. The confession of his past, and Eva's quiet, empathetic acceptance of it, changed the very air between them. The training remained as grueling as ever. Tommy was a relentless perfectionist, but the harsh, cynical edge to his commands was gone. It was replaced by a fierce, almost paternal concern. He was still pushing her to her limits, but now it felt as if he were pushing her not towards a breaking point, but away from one. He was not just her coach. He had become her fierce, unwilling protector. Their world shrank to the small, isolated stretch of the Kent coast. It was a world of tides, of wind, and of the relentless, shared pursuit of a single, monumental goal. The lines between their professional and personal lives began to blur. After a long day of swimming, they would often share a simple, quiet meal in his cottage. He would cook, his movements as surprisingly deft in the small kitchen as they were in a rowboat, and she would listen as he told stories of the sea, of the great swimmers he had known, his voice losing its gruffness as he spoke of the world he had once loved. She in turn told him of her life in America, of the family who believed in her, of the quiet, unshakable belief she held that the human body and spirit could achieve the impossible if only the mind was strong enough. He listened, and in her quiet determination, he found a refreshing antidote to his own long-held cynicism. One afternoon, the mail boat delivered a parcel from London. It contained newspapers. One of them had a front-page story about a celebrated French swimmer who had just made his own attempt at the Channel. He had been pulled from the water, suffering from hypothermia, just 5 miles from the English coast. He had failed. Tommy read the article, his face grim. "The Channel is a graveyard of dreams, Ava," he said, his voice low. "It does not care how strong you are. It does not care how much you want it. It is indifferent." "That is why we must not be," she replied simply. "That is why we must be stronger than its indifference." He looked at her, at the unwavering fire in her eyes, and he felt a familiar, unwelcome fear coil in his gut. It was the same fear he had felt for Lily, but it was now mingled with a new, more complicated emotion, a profound admiration for Eva's spirit. The true turning point came with the storm. It rolled in from the sea without warning, a furious tempest of wind and rain that turned the Channel into a churning, violent cauldron. Training was impossible. They were trapped, 2 solitary souls in his small, isolated cottage, the storm raging outside a perfect mirror for the unspoken turbulence between them. They spent the day in a quiet, domestic truce. He mended his fishing nets, his calloused fingers surprisingly nimble. She, in a gesture of quiet care, took it upon herself to bring some order to his cluttered living space, dusting the old trophies, organizing his chaotic bookshelf. As evening fell, he built a roaring fire in the hearth, the flames pushing back against the gloom. They sat before it, the sound of the wind and the rain a constant howling reminder of their isolation. "You have brought a tidiness to this place," he said, breaking a long, comfortable silence. "It is unfamiliar." "A home shouldn't be a stranger to its owner," she replied softly. He looked at her then, at her face illuminated by the warm, flickering firelight, and the last of his defenses seemed to crumble. The gruff coach, the bitter recluse, it all fell away, leaving only the man, a man who had been alone for a very long time. "When I watch you swim," he said, his voice a low, raw confession, "I see her. I see Lily, her strength, her fearlessness, and it terrifies me." He paused, his gaze intense. "But then when the swim is over and you are here in this room, I do not see a ghost, Ava." He reached out, his hand hesitating for a moment before his fingers gently brushed a stray, damp curl from her cheek. His touch was electric, a jolt of warmth in the stormy night. "I see you," he whispered, "and I am beginning to realize that the thought of you too, being taken by that water, it is a thought I cannot bear." The confession hung in the air between them, as real and as powerful as the storm outside. It was not a declaration of love, not yet. It was something more fragile, more profound. It was an admission of his own scarred, thawing heart. Ava did not pull away. She leaned into his touch, her eyes meeting his in the firelight. The long-held boundaries of coach and athlete, of 2 lonely strangers, had been washed away by the storm. And in the warm, quiet shelter of his small cottage, a new and far more dangerous current was beginning to pull them under. The morning after the storm, the world felt new. The sky was washed clean, a brilliant, cloudless blue, and the sea, once so angry, was now a calm, gentle expanse of shimmering turquoise. The change in the weather was mirrored in the small cottage. The tense professional distance between Eva and Tommy had been swept away, replaced by a quiet, tender intimacy. Their training resumed, but the dynamic had shifted. He was still a demanding coach, his eye for technical flaws as sharp as ever, but his voice had lost its harsh, cynical edge. His commands were now tempered with a clear concern for her well-being. His praise, though still rare, was genuine and warm. He was no longer just training an athlete. He was protecting the woman who had, against all odds, begun to mend his hardened heart. Eva, in turn, swam with a new purpose. She was no longer just fighting the water. She was fighting for him, for the sad, lonely man who had forgotten how to hope. Every powerful stroke was a declaration, a promise that she would not be another ghost in his sea of grief. She would be his triumph. Their connection deepened in the quiet moments between the grueling swims. They would walk along the beach in the evenings, their conversation easy and familiar, two lonely souls who had found in each other an unexpected and profound companionship. The day came when Tommy knew she was ready. Her stamina was at its peak, her technique flawless. They had studied the tides, the weather charts, and had chosen the perfect window for her attempt, a calm, neap tide at the end of the week. The final, brutal training sessions were complete. All that was left was to wait. On the evening before her great swim, they sat together on the smooth grey stones of the beach, watching the sun set over the calm, glass-like surface of the channel. The sky was a breathtaking tapestry of pink, orange, and purple. "It looks so peaceful now," Eva said softly. "It's hard to believe it can be so cruel." "It is neither cruel nor kind," Tommy replied, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "It simply is. It is we who bring our hopes and our fears to it." He turned to her, his face serious in the fading light. "Are you afraid, Eva?" "Yes," she admitted honestly, "but I am more determined than I am afraid, because of you. You have prepared me for this. You have given me the strength." He shook his head, a small, sad smile on his lips. "I have only shown you the strength you already possessed." He took her hand, his calloused fingers lacing through hers. "When you first came here, I saw you as a foolhardy girl, chasing a dangerous dream. I tried to break you, to send you away, because I could not bear the thought of the sea taking someone else I cared for." He looked into her eyes, his own full of a raw, powerful emotion she had never seen before. "I failed, Eva. I could not break you. Instead, you broke through the walls I had built around my own heart. You have brought life back to my quiet, empty world. You have made me feel again." He took a deep breath, the words he had held back for so long finally coming to the surface. "I am in love with you, Evangeline Wright. I have fallen in love with your impossible spirit, your unwavering courage, and your kind, gentle heart. It is a love that terrifies me, but it is also the only thing that has made me feel truly alive in 10 years. Tears welled in Eva's eyes as she looked at him, at this good, broken man who had tried so hard to hide his own heart. "Oh, Tommy," she whispered. "I believe I have been falling in love with you too. I fell in love with the gruff, sad man who was so afraid to hope again." He leaned in then, and in the soft purple twilight on the shore of the English Channel, he kissed her. It was a kiss that held all the power and the sorrow of the sea itself. It was a kiss of shared grief, of newfound hope, and of a love that was as deep and as undeniable as the tide. When they parted, he held her face in his hands. "Tomorrow," he said, his voice a low, intense promise, "you will swim that channel, you will conquer it, and when you reach the shores of France, I will be there, waiting for you." He paused, his gaze full of a fierce, loving light. "And when this is all over, I am asking you not to go back to America. I am asking you to come home. To me." It was not a question of marriage, not yet. It was a question of a future, a promise of a life together after the great trial was over. "Yes, Tommy," she said, her own voice full of a joyful certainty. "Yes." He kissed her again, sealing their promise. Tomorrow she would face the greatest physical challenge of her life. But as she sat there, her hand in his, she knew that the hardest crossing, the journey across the vast, cold channel of his heart, had already been made. and they had made it, together. Dawn broke over the English Channel, painting the calm grey water with strokes of pale pink and soft gold. The air was still, the conditions as perfect as they could ever hope for. On the shingled beach, Ava Wright stood, her body covered in a thick, protective layer of grease, a modern-day warrior preparing for battle. Tommy stood beside her, his face a mask of calm, focused intensity that could not quite conceal the profound fear in his eyes. There were no grand speeches. He simply placed his hands on her shoulders, his grip firm. "Find your rhythm," he said, his voice a low, steady rumble. "Do not fight the water, become a part of it. I will be beside you every stroke of the way. Just swim, Ava. Swim home." He didn't say to France, he said home. She gave him a single, determined nod. She then walked into the frigid water, the initial shock of the cold a familiar, brutal embrace. She dove forward and began to swim, her powerful rhythmic strokes cutting a clean, straight path towards the distant, invisible shores of France. Tommy followed in the small rowboat, a solitary guardian on a vast empty sea. The first few hours were a grueling, monotonous battle. Eva swam with a machine-like precision, her mind focused only on the rhythm of her arms, the kick of her legs, the timing of her breath. Tommy, rowing steadily beside her, would periodically pass her a small cup of beef broth or a piece of chocolate, his voice a constant, calming presence. "That's it, Ava. Strong and steady. You're making excellent time." But the channel was a cruel and patient opponent. As the sun climbed higher, the water, which had been calm, began to churn. The tide shifted, and a relentless, chilling cross-current began to pull at her, forcing her to expend precious energy just to stay on course. The cold, a constant, insidious enemy, began to seep deep into her bones. By the 10th hour, she was in a world of pure, unadulterated pain. Her muscles screamed, her shoulders felt as if they were being torn from their sockets, and her mind began to play tricks on her. She hallucinated, seeing the ghostly faces of other failed swimmers in the dark water below. The memory of her own past failure was a constant taunting whisper in her ear. "You can't do this, you will fail again." She was on the verge of quitting. Her strokes faltered. She stopped, treading water, her body heaving with exhaustion. "I can't, Tommy," she gasped, her voice a raw, broken sound. "It's too much." He looked at her face, pale with exhaustion and despair, and his own heart broke. He saw the ghost of his sister, Lily, in her eyes, but this time he refused to be helpless. "Listen to me, Evangeline Wright," he said, his voice a sharp, powerful command that cut through her delirium. "You are not just swimming for yourself. You are swimming for every person who was ever told they were not strong enough. You are swimming for my sister, for the dream she never got to finish. Her spirit is with you in this water. Now you will put your head down and you will swim for her. Do you hear me?" His words, a furious, passionate plea, were a jolt to her soul. She looked at him, at the fierce, unwavering belief in his face. She was not alone in this water. She was carrying his hope, his grief, his heart, with her. A new, ferocious wave of determination surged through her. She gave him a single, sharp nod, put her face back in the water and began to swim again. Her strokes stronger now, fueled not just by the power of her body, but by the strength of two hearts. She swam through the pain, through the exhaustion, through the ghosts. She swam as the sun began to set, turning the sky to a fiery, bruised purple. And then, in the distance, she saw it. A faint, flickering light. A lighthouse. The coast of France. A sob of pure, unadulterated triumph broke from her lips. She could see it. It was real. "You see it, Tommy?" she cried out, her voice raw. "I see it, my love," he answered, his own voice thick with tears. "You've done it. Now go. Go home." With the last of her strength, she swam, her entire being focused on that single distant light, the finish line of her impossible, incredible journey. The last mile was the longest of Eva's life. Her body was a screaming chorus of pain, every muscle depleted, every joint aching. The cold had settled deep in her bones, a permanent, shivering guest. She was no longer swimming, She was moving on pure, unadulterated will, her arms and legs a disconnected machinery propelled by the single brilliant image in her mind, the light on the French coast, and by the sound of Tommy's voice, a low, steady mantra from the rowboat beside her. That's it, Ava. Almost there. Every stroke is a victory. You are a champion. You are my champion. She did not feel like a champion. She felt like a drowning woman, but she kept going. She swam until her fingers scraped against sand and pebbles. For a moment, her exhausted mind could not process the sensation. Then, a small, gentle wave pushed her forward, and she was no longer in the water. She was on the shore. She stumbled to her feet in the shallow surf, her legs barely able to hold her. She took 1, 2, 3 steps onto the rocky beach of Cap Gris, France, and then collapsed onto her hands and knees. The solid, unmoving earth beneath her, the most wonderful feeling she had ever known. She had done it. A small crowd of French fishermen and locals, who had gathered after being alerted by the lighthouse keeper, erupted in a cheer. A moment later, Tommy was there, dragging his rowboat onto the shore. He ran to her, his own face a mask of profound relief and overwhelming pride. He knelt beside her in the sand and wrapped a thick, warm blanket around her trembling body, pulling her into his arms. "You did it, my love," he whispered into her hair, his voice choked with emotion. "You beat the sea." She looked up at him, a tired but triumphant smile on her face. "No," she breathed, "we beat it." The news of her success traveled across the channel on the telegraph wires like lightning. When they returned to Dover the next day, they were greeted not by the quiet emptiness of the coast, but by a cheering crowd of hundreds. Reporters shouted her name, photographers' flashbulbs popped, and the very people who had whispered about her foolishness now hailed her as a national hero. She was no longer the girl who failed. She was the queen of the channel, the woman who had conquered the unconquerable. The days that followed were a whirlwind of interviews, banquets, and public appearances. Eva handled it all with a quiet, unassuming grace, but her eyes were always searching the crowd for Tommy, her anchor in this new, chaotic storm of fame. He remained in the background, a quiet, protective presence, deflecting the more intrusive reporters and ensuring she was never overwhelmed. One evening, after a long and exhausting reception in London, they finally returned to the quiet solitude of his small cottage on the coast. The world outside was clamoring for Eva Wright, the hero, but inside, by the warm, crackling fire, they were just Eva and Tommy. The adulation, the fame, the headlines, it all seemed a distant, unreal dream. The only thing that felt real was the quiet, profound peace of being here, together, in the place where it had all begun. "They are calling you the greatest swimmer in the world," he said softly, handing her a cup of hot tea. "I had the world's greatest coach," she replied, her eyes meeting his. He shook his head. "I did not teach you how to be strong, Eva. You taught me. You walked into my life and reminded me that it was possible to face the ghosts of the past and win. You did not just conquer the channel. You rescued me." She reached out and took his hand. "Then I suppose we are even." He smiled, a genuine, happy smile that reached all the way to his eyes. The haunted, bitter man she had met months ago was gone, replaced by the kind, honorable man she had fallen in love with. His promise on the shore the night before her swim echoed in her heart. "Come home to me." She looked around the small, cozy cottage, at the familiar books on the shelf, at the firelight dancing on the walls, at the man holding her hand. "It's good to be home, Tommy," she whispered. The world, it turned out, was not finished with Eva Wright. Her triumphant conquest of the English Channel had turned her into an international sensation. She was the Queen of the Waves, America's mermaid, a symbol of modern female strength and endurance. Telegrams flooded Tommy's small cottage, offers for lucrative public appearances, endorsement deals for everything from swimwear to breakfast cereal, and even a shocking proposal for a Hollywood film to be made about her life. For a few dizzying weeks, they were swept up in a whirlwind of fame. They traveled to London for banquets held in her honor, where Eva, in elegant evening gowns that felt as foreign as her old swimming costume felt familiar, would shake hands with lords and ladies, all of whom wanted to touch a piece of her historic achievement. Tommy was always there, a quiet, steady presence at her side. He was her manager, her protector, her anchor in the chaotic sea of her newfound celebrity. But Eva saw the toll it was taking on him. He was a man of the coast, of solitude and sea spray. The flashbulbs of the photographers made him flinch, and the empty flattery of the high society soirees left him looking weary and out of place. She too felt the pull of their quiet life, the endless interviews, the staged photographs. It all felt hollow compared to the simple, profound reality of her swim, of the quiet partnership that had made it possible. One evening, back in the sanctuary of the cottage, she turned to him. "This isn't us, Tommy," she said softly. "This world of parties and headlines." "No," he agreed, his eyes full of relief. "It is not. My dream was to swim the channel," she said, a new resolve in her voice. "Not to be on the cover of a magazine. I don't want this life." "Then what do you want, Eva?" he asked. She looked out the window at the dark, moonlit water. "I want to help others feel what I felt," she said. "The challenge, the triumph, the feeling of doing the impossible. I want to honor the water, not exploit it." In that moment, a new shared dream was born. They had the knowledge, the experience, and now, thanks to Eva's fame, the resources to do something meaningful. They would not turn their backs on the world of swimming. They would reshape it. They politely declined the Hollywood offers and the endorsement deals. Instead, they used the prize money from her swim and the funds from a few carefully selected sponsors to purchase a larger property on the Kent coast, not far from Tommy's own small cottage. It was a handsome old house with a stretch of private beach, the perfect location for their new venture. They would open the Ashton Wright School for long-distance swimming. It was to be a place unlike any other. Not a factory for producing champions, but a haven for nurturing the spirit of endurance swimmers. Eva, with her fresh, triumphant experience and her natural empathetic gift for teaching, would be its heart. She would mentor the young swimmers, focusing on their mental fortitude as much as their physical strength. Tommy, the legendary tactician, would be its mind. He came alive in this new role. The bitter, reclusive man was gone forever, replaced by a passionate, brilliant coach who had finally found a way to honor his sister's memory. He designed innovative training regimens, studied the complex patterns of the channel's tides, and became a fierce advocate for swimmer safety. His old gruff demeanor was still there, but now his students understood it for what it was, a deep, unwavering commitment to their success and their survival. They were a perfect team. He was the strategist who understood the cruelty of the sea. She was the champion who understood the strength of the human heart. 1 year after her historic swim, they stood together on the cliff top, looking down at the beach below. A small group of their first students, their faces full of the same nervous, determined hope that had once been on Eva's, were preparing for a training swim. The Ashton Wright School was a reality. It was their shared legacy, a testament to their love story. "Look at them," Eva said, her voice full of a quiet, maternal pride, ready to chase their own impossible dreams. Tommy slipped his arm around her waist, pulling her close. "They have the best teacher in the world," he murmured. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the young swimmers brave the cold grey water. They were no longer just a coach and an athlete, no longer just two lonely souls who had found each other. They were partners, founders, the quiet, legendary keepers of the channel, turning their own triumph into a beacon of hope for all who dared to dream. The Ashton Wright School for long-distance swimming became a quiet legend on the English coast. It was a place of grueling work, but also of profound camaraderie and inspiration. Eva and Tommy were a perfect team. She was the heart of the school, a nurturing, inspiring mentor who understood the fears and dreams of her students. He was its mind, a brilliant tactician and a respected, if still gruff, master of the sea. They lived and worked together in a seamless, comfortable partnership. They shared a house, they shared their meals, they shared their life's work. They were, in every sense of the word, a married couple, except for the fact that they were not. The unspoken question of marriage hung in the quiet spaces between them. They were two solitary people, both scarred by the past, and they had found in each other a partnership so perfect that they were perhaps afraid to change its delicate chemistry with a formal vow. The catalyst for change came in the form of a letter from America. Ava's family, who had followed her triumphs with immense pride, announced they were finally making the long journey across the ocean to visit her. The news filled Eva with a mixture of joy and a quiet, new anxiety. How would she explain her relationship with Tommy? Her family was of a traditional, conservative mindset. They would not understand their unconventional, unmarried partnership. She spoke of her worries to Tommy one evening as they walked along the clifftop, watching the sun set. He listened, his expression thoughtful. "They are worried for your reputation," he stated, understanding the heart of the matter immediately. "They are worried for my happiness," she corrected him gently. He stopped walking and turned to her, taking both of her hands in his. "And are you happy, Eva?" he asked, his gaze searching hers. "I have never been happier in my entire life," she said, the truth of the words a profound, simple fact. "As have I," he said, his voice a low, serious murmur. "You have given me a new life, a new purpose. You have quieted the ghosts that haunted me for a decade. You are my partner, my best friend, my heart." He took a deep breath. "I believe it is time we made that official, don't you?" He did not have a ring. He did not get down on one knee. It was not a grand, dramatic proposal. It was a simple, honest, and profound question between two people who already knew the answer. Tears of joy welled in Eva's eyes. "Yes, Tommy," she whispered. "I believe it is." Their wedding took place a week later, on the very same clifftop where they had made their decision, the place that had been the silent witness to their entire journey. It was a small, simple ceremony. Ava's family was there, their faces full of joy and relief. A few of their first successful students from the school stood with them, their new, chosen family. Ava wore a simple, elegant dress, the color of the sea on a calm day. Tommy wore a handsome dark suit, his usual gruffness replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated love. They exchanged simple vows as the sun set over the English Channel, the water that had once been a symbol of her trial, and his tragedy now the beautiful, peaceful backdrop to their greatest joy. They promised each other not a life free of storms, but a lifetime of being each other's anchor. When the local vicar pronounced them husband and wife, Tommy kissed his bride, a kiss filled with the quiet, profound certainty of a love that had been tested by the sea and had emerged strong and true. That evening, they stood together on the porch of his old cottage, which they had decided to keep as their own private sanctuary. The sounds of a small, happy celebration drifted from the main house of the school. "Mrs. Ashton," he said, trying the name out, a wide, happy grin on his face. "Mr. Ashton," she replied, her own heart soaring with a peaceful, perfect joy. They looked out at the water, at the moonlight dancing on the calm, dark waves. The Queen of the Channel and the man who had guided her home were finally, officially, where they had always belonged. Together. Their greatest adventure was over, and their life, their true life, was just beginning. The years flowed on, as steady and as constant as the tides of the English Channel. The Ashton Wright School for Long-Distance Swimming became a name whispered with reverence in swimming communities around the world. It was a place of excellence, a humble school on the Kent coast that produced some of the era's most formidable and resilient endurance athletes. But it was known for something more than just breaking records. It was known for its heart. It was a place that taught its swimmers not just how to battle the water, but how to respect it. Not just how to strengthen their bodies, but how to fortify their spirits. Eva and Tommy Ashton were the soul of the institution. They grew old together, their love a quiet, unshakable partnership that was the bedrock of the school. Eva, with her champion spirit and her profound empathy, was the school's beloved mentor, a living inspiration to every young swimmer who walked through their doors. Tommy, his past grief finally laid to rest, had rediscovered his passion and his purpose. He was a brilliant coach, a master tactician of the sea, a gruff but deeply caring father figure to the generations of swimmers he guided. They never had children of their own. Their family was the one they had built, a sprawling international family of determined young athletes who looked to them not just as coaches, but as mentors and guides. One bright, windswept afternoon in the late 1930s, Eva and Tommy, now in their late 40s and early 50s, stood on the familiar clifftop, watching one of their star pupils, a determined young woman from Australia, make her way through the choppy grey water below. The scene was a perfect echo of a day so many years ago, but everything was different. The bitter, lonely man was gone, replaced by a contented, respected mentor. The desperate young swimmer was gone, replaced by a confident, serene woman who was now a living legend. "She has your fire, you know," Tommy said, his voice a low, fond murmur as he watched the swimmer below. That same stubborn, beautiful refusal to quit. "She has your guidance," Eva replied, leaning her head against his shoulder. "You taught her how to read the water. You are giving her the map you made for me." He smiled, wrapping his arm around her. "The map was always within you, my love. I just helped you learn to trust it." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the swimmer, their hands intertwined. The channel, the great formidable beast that had been the site of his greatest tragedy and her greatest triumph, was no longer an adversary. It was their home. It was their life's work. It was the constant, powerful witness to their own enduring love story. The story of the Queen of the Channel and the disgraced champion who coached her became a quiet legend on the English coast. It was a story told not in newspaper headlines, but in the quiet, shared moments of inspiration at their school. It was a testament to the idea that the deepest wounds could be healed, that the most painful ghosts could be laid to rest, and that a second chance at life and at love was always possible. "Do you ever miss it?" he asked softly. "The roar of the crowd? The fame?" Eva smiled, her gaze fixed on the endless, beautiful horizon. "The only roar I ever needed to hear," she whispered, "was the sound of the sea and the beating of your heart." He kissed the top of her head, his heart full of a quiet, perfect peace. They had not just conquered the channel, they had built a life, a legacy, and a love that was as deep, as powerful, and as timeless as the sea itself. Our greatest triumphs are often born from the ashes of our deepest wounds. Do not let the ghosts of past failures define your future. Have the courage to face the very thing that broke you, for in that confrontation you may find your greatest strength. A true partner is not someone who shields you from the storm, but someone who rows the boat beside you, reminding you of the shore when you are lost in the waves. The most beautiful legacy is not the record you break, but the knowledge and hope you pass on to those who follow in your wake.